I think regardless of people's political positions, I've certainly, I mean, unless you maybe we're talking to some like super white nationalist or something like, legitimately far right kind of thing. I don't think anybody denies or tries to diminish any historical injustice, whether you're talking about slavery, whether you're talking about the Holocaust, whether you're talking about the army.
Ruslan. One of the things I appreciate about you is that you're very individual above community, like we talked about earlier. And I think that has a lot to do with your framework. And I think this is also true in Canada, where you were like, it's like in the UK, you told me like in the UK, we don't have like a black community. No. Like we have Nigerians and different people, and it's the same thing in Canada. Here in America, there seems to be or appear to be, I guess a unified, that's even a generality, but there seems to be more of a black community, kind of based on the collective historic trauma that black people have endured in America.
Sure.
You're very much so about the individual responsibility choices, which I'm with you on. Do you think that your view is reflected, though, based on your experience, in that because you are Nigerian, who was raised in Saudi Arabia, UK citizen, and therefore you don't see much of a black community that's kind of attached to the collective trauma and experience that black people have had in America?
I mean, I don't even believe in collective trauma.
Okay.
I would question it.
So do you think like the Holocaust was, I mean, that's pretty fair, that's collective trauma, or like Armenian people, there was a genocide of 1915.
I mean, I know what you mean. I know what you mean by it.
Yeah.
But
because like Armenians definitely feel collective trauma.
Sure.
Like 1915, April, it's a thing. Like we talk about it,
okay,
and it's a thing,
gotcha,
right? And I think the Jewish people, they still talk about the Holocaust. There's like Holocaust museums and all that kind of stuff. Armenians are, till this day, Turkey will not acknowledge that as a genocide, and that till this day has issues because America is an ally of Turkey, and it just gets very confusing. And the reason why me and my family came out here as refugees was because of the pogroms of Baku, which was an overflow of the situation from the 1915 genocide on the Armenians, right? The Arzis essentially attempted a genocide on the Armenians. They pushed us out of Azerbaijan. That's why we came here. So we definitely have a degree of acknowledging and remembering our collective trauma. And sometimes I think some of the positions or the pundits, I'm not saying this is your view, but from the right, can be very dismissive of the black experience of black trauma in America, right? We're okay with Jewish people talking about the history that they endured and trauma they endured. We're okay with Armenians for the most part. I've never had somebody tell me, you're living in the past. How dare you acknowledge the genocide of 1950? That was 100 years ago. Stop complaining. But when it comes to black people in slavery, or when it comes to black people in Jim Crow, when it comes to black people in whatever, redlining, the war on drugs, there tends to be this like very dismissive, just get over it. At least in America. I mean, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. I think it's kind of nuanced, man. So I think that, I think regardless of people's political positions, I've certainly, I mean, unless you maybe we're talking to some like super white nationalist or something like, legitimately far right kind of thing. I don't think nobody I'm aware of, certainly nobody decent, denies or tries to diminish any historical injustice, whether you're talking about slavery, whether you're talking about the Holocaust, whether you're talking about the army.
I mean, I think people here,
really?
My white friends are my conservative white friends can be very non-empathetic in the whole like, that was hundreds of years ago, like move on. Well, what about?
Well, I'm like that, so maybe.
Yeah, but I mean, we wouldn't say that to a Jewish person or to an Armenian person.
Yeah, but Jewish people aren't blaming. Jewish people who exist now, people acknowledge the Holocaust. Everybody acknowledges this was an awful, terrible thing that happened. But for a Jewish person who is 18 years old right now and who never lived through it and whose parents didn't live through it, maybe their grandparents did, right? Then they're generally, You know, I don't like to generalize, but in most cases, they are not using that as any kind of excuse for their, you know, I was going to say their current situation. They're generally like crushing it as a, you know, as a group, but they're not using those. They're acknowledging that and remembering that, but they're not using that as a first they're not using it as a weapon, as a cudgel against other people, and they're not using it as any kind of excuse for their own personal failings or behaviors or actions.
Do you think that is what's happening in the black community, though? Because I think
some people are.
Okay.
Some people are.
Some people are.
I'm not saying everybody. Again, I'm an individualist, so I don't want to try to paint some broad brush about millions and millions of people.
I can't say if some people are. I definitely think that there is a desire for an acknowledgement of these things, which, as far as I know, it took hundreds of years for America to even apologize for slavery, like to come out and publicly be like, yeah, that was messed up.
Did every other country? Well, what about every other country in the world that?
I mean, I can't speak for every country. I just know here. You know what I mean?
But see, the thing with even the slavery conversation is every race of people that I'm aware of has both been slaves and held slaves historically, right? And you know, America was one of the first places where when people think of slavery, they always think of American slavery, even though that America isn't even the place that had the most slaves. There are far more slaves in Brazil than there were in America, for example. So, but whenever people say slavery, they always think specifically of black people being enslaved in America, which is, you know, absolutely happened and is acknowledged. That's in history. Yeah. But there was slavery going on in Africa. There was slavery going on in the Caribbean. There was slavery going on in South America, in the Arab world, all over, in Europe. Okay, the word Slav, slave itself from Slav, right? You know, Slavic people. So I find it weird to always the focus is always so much in on that without the sort of wider context of like, okay, well, hang on, if we kind of zoom out here, this was like a huge global human issue. So this is not like to dismiss anything or to be diminishing of everything, but there's only so much acknowledgement that you can do, right? And continuing to acknowledge something, and you know, acknowledgement is important to learn lessons and say, okay, let's not. Humans have done a lot of terrible crap in the past. Like let's not do this again. Let's not do this stuff again. Okay. But if something did happen 100 years ago, and you didn't live through it, and your parents didn't live through it, then to still be using that as, you know, it's. I mean, I'm not a hyper emotional person, so I'm not someone who gets caught up in the emotion and the feelings of like, oh, let me spend all this time, you know, acknowledging your feelings and acknowledging your like. Ultimately, it's like, look, what actions? Sure. What's the situation now, and what actions will make things better, both individually and collectively as a society?
No, and I'm with you. I think that the tough part is though, like my mother-in-law and father-in-law did live through the war on drugs. Okay, which was, I mean, if you go and pull up some of them Nixon and Reagan things that have leaked recently, was a war on black people and hippies. Okay. You know what I mean? Like that's came out. You know, like it is what it is. So it's like, so yes, slavery hundreds of years ago. I'm talking about 80s. I'm talking about the CIA on the record coming out and being, yeah, we were complicit. We knew that this coke was coming in, and we looked the other way because that was funding, you know, the rebels to fight communism in Nicaragua, right? All that stuff is documented, and then the harsher sentences on, you know, the disproportion of how crack users were sentenced versus coke users, right? Which
wasn't that decided by, wasn't it black people who came up with that decision? I believe.
I think there was definitely black people involved in that, but I don't know if black people were legislating. I don't know if they were they were the ones legislating, but there was definitely black people that were pushing for that, for sure. So what I'm saying is like, this is stuff that's.
So I think it's the same.
30 years ago.
So I think it's the same with crystal meth versus what's the less dodgy version of it. I can't remember.
I don't know what the less dodgy version of it is. But yes, crystal meth definitely gets sentenced harsher.
Yeah,
but again, then that's a poor man's drug, right?
Sure.
Versus
That's
like
what
coke, guys on Wall Street use coke.
Yeah, exactly.
Very high rates, and they're not getting sentenced at the same rate that crystal meth. But then people say, well, it's because of the way that this drug affects the neighborhoods and this and this and that.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, we've had my own parents, you know what I mean, have been harshly sentenced and have done a lot of jail time over stuff that was happening in the white community. And I'm not talking about violent crimes, you know what I mean? And so I think that's the stuff. So then when we're talking about generational wealth, right? The best way we know to have a shot at building generational wealth is what? Growing up in a household with both a loving mother and a loving father.
Of course.
That was the undone. A lot of that was disrupted in the 70s and the 80s. And the ability to buy real estate and pass it down.
Yeah.
That was disrupted. And redlining, I'm not sure what year redlining was. So yes, people are individuals, but these things didn't happen in a vacuum. The stuff that the black community faced here in the 70s, the 80s, the war on drugs, I think they even tried to do a war on poverty. You know what I'm saying? Like, this stuff was heavy, man. And I think it is nuanced. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's nuanced. Look, the easy. I acknowledge a lot of things you're saying, and I've spoken to a lot of people who talk about these things. Thing with me is I look forward, not backwards. So, like if I'm like, okay, cool, like yes, like okay, now what? That's where I'm at.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I'm with you.
That's very much where I am. So people can talk about all of these issues, historical injustice. That can be done.
Do you think the average
nation.
Conservative, Republican, Trump voter has the temperament and the level of empathy to even acknowledge it?
I don't know.
Okay, because that's not the vibe.
I don't know.
Like that's very much so not the vibe. The vibe, it's like a traumatized woman who was in a relationship with an abusive man, and we want healing and restoration.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And instead of saying like, all right, well, that was terrible, that should not have happened to you, that was bad, let's get you on your feet. It's like, let's just move on, figure it out, get going, pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
I feel like,
you know what I'm saying? Without an acknowledgement of the trauma.
I think that's a caricature. I think that's like a caricature of conservatives.
Maybe.
I'm not saying not saying there's nobody like that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's nobody like that. I think that's a.
I don't know the percentages.
Sure.
From my interactions and my experiences, it tends to be pretty high.
Look, the reality is, I mean, you need both.
Julio Jones. I'm from Atlanta, you throw me the ball and I score in the zone. They hit me up for a deal like it's something I do on the phone. Just cause it's me in the studio don't mean I do it alone. Julio Jones. I'm from Atlanta.